Hey y'all, back with another video for you guys. So I haven't forgotten about my regular just videos where I just kind of, talk about a different topic, whatever's on my mind and something that I think can add value to you guys. This is just more underneath like the kind of random thoughts type of videos, but I haven't forgotten everyone, even though I'm really excited about the Science Simplified series. So that will definitely keep going, but so will these videos. So don't worry, neither are going anywhere. I'm trying to be more regular with them, so hopefully that has been taken note of. And I'm just really excited for both. If you haven't checked out Science Simplified series, definitely do that. There's a few videos on there I think you guys will really like if you like sciencey stuff. So today I want to talk about refeed meals, untracked meals, cheat meals, what is the difference? And these are things that get thrown around all the time with, people, talking about them on social media. I feel like there's a lot of questions and confusion around them, both for just everyone listening or my clients, so really wanted to kind of dive into that. I'll be the first person to say that there's really not a ton of research on this. And again, understandably, most research is not done on this type of stuff, but there's not really a ton out there. If there are good refeeding type research papers that I find, I will talk about those in my Science Simplified series for sure. But for this video and its purposes, it's gonna be really, really application-based, really practitioner-based, as a coach and as a competitor myself. So let's dive into this topic. So while there are similarities with, refeeds, cheat meals, untracked meals, there are very distinct differences, so I wanted to kind of go over that. First and foremost, when there's no real defined way to say a cheat meal is essentially, from my understanding, just eating kind of whatever you want for a meal. And I do think that that has its place in some points, but I don't agree with the semantics of it, which is why I don't recommend them. So when you say the word cheat, you're already kind of giving food this good or bad connotation. It just cracks me up when people, if I eat a burger, they're like, oh, is that like a cheat for you? Like, what? There's just meat and vegetables and maybe a bun, maybe not. It doesn't make sense to me when people say stuff like that. And I get where they're coming from. Obviously, that's not on your normal plan. A burger isn't usually on most people's meal plans. But for me, as somebody who's flexible dieting, and not just it fits your macros, refer back to my flexible dieting video on just what truly I think flexible dieting is. So, being able to incorporate any food, anytime, any amount. Now, of course, if I'm dieting, I'm not going to go to a restaurant and get a massive burger with all these toppings. That's just not happening, you guys. But just using that as an example, oh my God, is that a bad food? You're like, is that a cheat meal for you? I'm like, what? No. If I'm eating, 2,500 calories a day, I think I can handle having a burger. So again, that just comes down to the semantics of it. And I don't like the word cheat meal or cheat day, particularly for competitors, because usually the people who are saying have a cheat meal or something like that are people who are giving out very restrictive plans. So when you have a very restrictive meal plan, then when you say, oh, go have a cheat day, then, you're opening up all the possibilities to every single food that hasn't been on your list. Now, that's understandable because you're being really, really restricted, so you don't want to eat that. So again, it makes sense. And typically, again, a burger and fries or something is going to be considered a cheat meal because you're like, oh, that's not on my meal plan, so this must be a bad meal. Not recommending having a burger and fries every day, absolutely not. I'm just using that for the video purposes, y'all. So don't take that, oh, Lauren said to eat burgers every day. No, I didn't say that. But you can make really lean burgers. So again, whatever, regardless, not getting into that. We're getting into the kind of the cheat meal mentality. So what usually from anecdotal experience ends up happening is that these people will have these very restrictive plans and then they'll say, oh, have a cheat meal. And then usually, sometimes it'll just be a higher calorie meal. Cool. But then for a lot of people, what it does is it turns into a time to binge. And then the meal isn't just a meal anymore. It's let me shove my face for as long as I can in this meal window. I've even heard of people being given times, eat whatever you want for 3 hours on Saturday. Do you know how much damage I could do in 3 hours of eating? Oh my God, especially if you don't know when your next calorie drop is gonna be. And just think about it, if you're a dieting athlete who is lean, so your hormones are already off, your hunger signals are off, you're just feeling pretty fucking crazy, and then someone, and you're eating, let's say, a really restrictive plan, you're eating the typical, fish and chicken and maybe some vegetables and the occasional, half a serving of oatmeal, and then someone says, go eat whatever you want for 3 hours, you're gonna house some food, and that's going to be a serious problem. It's going to be really detrimental to your progress, which is why I'm very against cheat meals, the semantics that it is about. I want to talk about untracked meals and how I think that that is probably a better terminology and a better way to set this up. So if you do follow me and my approach, you will know that I'm very pro just living your life and eating. Again, not really talking about the dieting scenario now. We're talking more about just like off season, or just anytime when you're not in a competition prep, basically, or a dieting situation. I often use the word off season even for like non-competition clients. So sorry if that's confusing, but just an off time from dieting. I think that, it's very important just to go and eat sometimes what you want. Like go and eat something, that definitely doesn't fit my macros, or that definitely doesn't fit part of whatever, but sometimes you just want to have stuff, like, and that's okay, right? So I'm very, very pro that, and I never want people to think like I'm not, but everything has to be within reason, within context. Again, if you're 3 weeks out from a show, not a good idea. If you're 6 months into an off season, totally appropriate. So again, context, be smart, guys. But what I like to recommend is this untracked meal, and I will actually do this for clients. If you're one of my clients and this has happened, you probably know. So typically when people get to a point where we're wrapping up an off season and trying to go into a dieting phase, or if there is a holiday coming up, I do this a lot over the holidays just because it's mentally a lot easier. Or also just if somebody, has an event coming up and maybe they, mentally, if they have an event and they know that they can't hit their numbers, that could turn into something like really bad. So I say, hey, just, eat normally throughout the day and then have this untracked meal. That usually avoids any of those big up and down fluctuations mentally and with food intake. So just going into this knowing, okay, hey, I'm gonna have an untracked meal, once or twice per week. And basically it can be at home, you can make it, or you can go out to eat. It doesn't have to be like, again, if you view the untracked meal as like, I gotta go out and eat everything possible in this amount of time, like, no, then we gotta have a talk. That's not what we want. That's definitely not good. You're being far too restrictive during the week then. If I say have an untracked meal, you and your boyfriend or your friends go out and grab, a drink or two, have your meal, and then you're like, whoa, this dessert looks bomb, and you eat it, and that's more calories than you normally have, but then you just get back on track the next day. Far different than eat whatever you want for 3 hours and you end up binging. Way different. The mentality is really important too. As far as calorie consumption, they may or may not, add up to be the same, but the mental perspective is so important. What I would recommend if you are in the off season and you do have more calories to play with, kind of maintaining your body weight, you're just hanging out, is to start incorporating these untracked meals. It's also really good for people who are way too rigid with their diet, and I know a lot of people like that, so this does help kind of break them out of that shell and say like, hey, you could track for most of the day and then just kind of have this meal at the end. So you can either track during the day, or you can just kind of eyeball things, save up some room, but don't save so much that when, you go to have this untracked meal, you've hoarded all your numbers, so now you're starving, and then again, you eat a lot, and then you come home and you're like, oh, well, there's cookies in the pantry too, I might as well have this for my untracked meal. Again, no, we don't want that. So just, eat, I would say normally throughout the day, and then just have a higher calorie meal, be mindful. But eat what you want, enjoy. If it's going out, order something that you've been wanting to try. If it's at home and you're like, oh man, this recipe looks so good, but you're like, oh, I don't know how to figure out the macros and it just seems like a lot, maybe just make that one night and have that. So I think that is far different than having a cheat meal or the cheat meal mentality. And while maybe the food choices may or may not look the same, again, the mental outcomes are so much more important for an athlete, whether you're in the off season or you're dieting for a competition, or you're just a regular, like a lifestyle person, off season or dieting. It is so vitally important to keep all of the mental aspects intact, because feeling like you've overeaten or binged, even if it's not a lot of calories, still feels terrible. Whereas you can overeat something and enjoy yourself and just kind of move on with your day. That's a lot different. So if you are in the off season and this is an appropriate time within this context to have an untracked meal, I would try that. If you're a coach watching, try that with some of your clients, see how they respond. Some people love it, some people hate it, some people they have to work on it because they're like, oh, I don't know if I can handle it, and that's something to work on. So all the things to consider, but I would definitely recommend that when you are in a period of higher calories and you're trying to instill more flexibility. And lastly, let's talk about refeed meals. So the biggest difference between a refeed meal and everything else we've talked about is a refeed is very, very structured in my books. This could look different if you talk to another coach, maybe it's different. I'm honestly not sure, but everyone that I kind of talk with, this is around the same idea. So a refeed day is very structured, whether it is from macros or meal plan. I would coach with macros. If you do have a coach who uses a meal plan, that you still might have refeed days, it would just be on the meal plan. Again, not really sure, but speaking from my experience, what I would do, you know, as a coach or a competitor is have these structured refeeds. And the biggest difference between the refeeds and cheat meals or untracked meals is the structure. So even with the untracked meal, even though that's like using a flexible approach and just kind of, you know, eating what you want and enjoying, and it's, I think, still far better than having the cheat meal mentality, it's still not very structured. So you wouldn't necessarily want to do that during prep as much, because during prep you're trying to control a lot of variables, and you know, you're really trying to bring your best for a certain day. So when you have that kind of a deadline, I think it's far more important to be very, very structured. I don't typically use refeeds in the off season unless somebody is just coming off of a diet and their calories are pretty low, and you know, so I do the initial bump, but then usually I'll still keep in the refeeds, because during the diet I will usually always keep in refeeds. Maybe you know, the end can be a little different for everyone, but for the most part there's going to be refeeds there. So until calories, you know, get considerably higher, sometimes I'll keep that in, just depending again on the client, how long they've been dieting, where their calories were at, things like that. Also, some people in the off season, even when their calories are higher, would still rather have more, like 1 or 2 days of a refeed day, even if it is structured. So then they could say, hey, I'd rather have more this day so that I can account for, you know, the weekend with my families or my friends or whatever it may be. So typically they're only used during dieting scenario, but can be used in the off season too. And that just depends on your personal goals and your schedule. So for the refeed, again, this will look a little bit different for everyone. Typically, it's at minimum just an increase in carbs. Sometimes it may be an increase in carbs and fats, depending on your calories, depending on where you're at. Some people change protein. I am not a fan of changing protein. I think protein should be a constant every day. I don't think it needs to go up or down. I don't think that's very appropriate. That's just my personal opinion on that. So, you know, do what you like and what works for you. But for me, I always just keep protein constant, and then the biggest variables are carbs and fats, mostly carbs though. And so yeah, the refeed days are just very structured. They'll either be a set of target macros, or again, if you're on a meal plan and you know your coach has you on a refeed day, it will be a set increase of food, and it's very, very controlled. So we don't have much research on that, like I mentioned, but it is something that will be researched in the future, possibly with people that I know. So that's exciting. More to come on that when I can talk about it. But in any case, I'm very excited to learn more about them from a science perspective, but from a practical standpoint, I know from coaching people and also, you know, talking with other coaches how important they are. And even as an athlete, you know, my own feedback from doing different types of refeeds. So I think they're vitally important, and I really think they should be implemented however you find was appropriate for you. So I'm hoping that was helpful and that cleared some things up for you guys between cheat meals, refeed meals, and untracked meals. They all do have a place, they all do have a purpose, but I do think, you know, during a dieting perspective, refeeds are of course number one, because they are controlled and then you do know all the variables. I do think that untracked meals are awesome and can be implemented into your off season amazingly, and I don't really feel that cheat meals are super appropriate just because of the semantics. When you really break it down, it may look from a food perspective and a calorie perspective similar to an untracked meal, but again, the psychology behind it is very different, and then a lot of times that does turn into binges. Not for everyone. So if you have your cheat meal and you really like it and you don't see any side effects, then, you know, who am I to judge, right? Do whatever works for you. But if you do kind of notice these tendencies, maybe work towards more of the untracked meal and kind of talk about the mindset shifts that I talked about. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hopefully this was helpful. Give it a like and definitely share it for anyone who has asked you this question before.